pleasing to you. Amen.
Amen.
So I know I can say in confidence that Daniel, Darren, and Holly have all done what I did today. Because I want to tell you that the last time I was with you, which was about 3 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think, I told Daniel afterwards I didn't feel like I had done service to the sermon. I didn't feel like I was prepared well enough. And so I made sure this time, this morning, I took a look at this reading, and I have been preparing for quite some time. And I really feel like I've got to the heart of this message from Jesus. And I was ready and willing and able to inspire you. And then this morning I changed the whole thing. This is true. I had 3 conversations over the course of the last 2 days, pastoral conversations over the last 2 days, that completely changed my framework for this sermon for you this morning. And I know you guys have done the same thing. It's happened to you the same thing. To me, this has always been Jesus talking to me. This is God. It's going, not that, this. I want you to do this. If we look at this reading, this gospel reading, there's a handful of things that kind of jump out at us that are really important to look at. First of all, Jesus has done it again. Jesus likes to use hyperbole. He likes to use the extremes. He likes to say things that kind of shock us into recognizing what he's trying to get across to us. This says Peter's told to forgive 70 times. In the King James Version, it's 7 times 77. I don't know about you, but I ain't forgiven somebody 490 times. I'm just not able to do it. I'm not sure 70 or 7 I can do this. Yet Jesus uses this kind of strong, extreme language to wake Peter up. And remember, as we read the Bible, and the great thing about the Bible is that it's an ongoing, constant, living document. When Jesus is talking to Peter, he's talking to us. He's talking to us. And he's talking about forgiveness in this story. He's telling us that God forgives us and expects us to forgive in the same way. Now, if we unpack this story a little bit further, we'll see that there is some language in here that seems strange. For example, in this, the New Revised Standard Version, the person is called a slave. I think we would all figure if you're a slave, how can you owe somebody something? He owns you. And in the other translations, it's servant. And I think that's a more realistic translation, that this is the story of a king who has a servant who owes him money. Now, this many talents, notice the servant owed the king talents. The person who was the servant's debtor owed him denarii. The number of talents in this story, were this today, would be $1.5 billion. That's how much a talent was. And the denarii would be $15,000. In other words, the talents that the king is owed by this servant is 15 years' wages. Again, Jesus uses these extreme numbers for us so that we can not lose sight of the fact that God's forgiveness is extreme as well, and that he expects the same from us. So as I began to think about the Jesus form of forgiveness, I began to realize that there are some characteristics to it that can help us. The forgiveness that Jesus is calling us to, first of all, is hard. This is hard work. Forgiveness is hard work. If you look at the 3 guts of the Gospels, to me, are love, compassion, and forgiveness. Forgiveness is hard work. I don't know about you, but I'm not good at it, and I've never been good at it. I work at it, but I've never been good at it. The Jesus forgiveness lasts forever. It's not a come and go thing. Jesus is saying to us, God forgives us forever, and he expects us to do the exact same thing. That it's not something that we can give and take back. That when we've made the conscious decision to forgive someone for something they have done, we're doing it for good, for life. It lasts, goes on forever. It's also freely given. And this is an important part, I think, of what Jesus is saying in terms of forgiveness. Forgiveness that comes begrudgingly is not Jesus' forgiveness. The forgiveness that comes because mentally I say to myself, I really need to forgive Parker for this thing he did, but I don't really feel, is not Jesus' forgiveness. Because Jesus' forgiveness starts here, ends up here, and results in action. It starts in the head and it goes to our heart before we move. And if it doesn't get to our heart, it's not Jesus' forgiveness. This is not the forgiveness God calls us to. If it just stays here and it's intellectual, we haven't gone far enough. God expects us to go further. God expects it to become part of us in here, internally. And finally, I think the other important part of forgiveness that we sometimes lose sight of is its forgetness too. How often have we heard, I can forgive you, but I can't forget you. I can forgive what you did to me, but I won't forget it. Jesus is saying you got to forget it too. Jesus is saying it's not just forgiveness for the sake of forgiving. It's got to go. It's got to move out of our heart to action and out of our lives. Now, the thing that I changed this morning, that affected me the most this morning, is I've had 3 pastoral calls over the last 2 days, conversations with people who were really hurting. All 3 of those conversations eventually boiled down to the people not being able to forgive themselves for something they have done. And I realized that self-forgiveness may be the most essential forgiveness that we need to take part in, that we need to participate in, that we have to learn to let it go in here about ourselves as well. Now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to make a Jesus-like radical statement. If I could go back and do everything I've done in my life, I think I'd go back and do it all over again. And I'd do it differently. If I knew what I know now, I'd do it differently. I'd make it better. I'd want to change everything. And I have major regrets in my life that have hounded me most of my life. Some of them have to do with the way I brought up my children and my marriage. Some of them had to do with the way I treated coworkers at a certain time. And I've had these regrets that have sat deeply in me for quite some time. And it was about 10 years ago when I realized, after reading this gospel message, that it was really important for me to begin to forgive myself. That I was going to have to somehow let stuff go. And I was going to have to forget it as well as forgive myself. And so I began to realize that there are ways to look at self-forgiveness that Jesus guides us on as well. And here's the most important part of self-forgiveness. Everyone, if you hear nothing else this morning, hear this. We always have to remember Jesus has already forgiven us. We're already forgiven for all of the terrible stuff we've done. As long as we have asked forgiveness, God tells us he forgives us. It's already been forgiven. And if God can forgive us, for goodness sakes, we ought to be able to forgive ourselves. We ought to be able to look at the things we've done and say, I can get past this. Now, we still have to take it from the head to the heart to action. We still have to be intentional about it. We have to be mindful about self-forgiveness. It doesn't mean that we should ignore what we have done, but it gives us a chance to look at the things we've done and say, they're done. They're done. They're gone. I did it. It's been this many years or this many months or this many weeks. It's gone. I can't do anything about it. Knowing that Jesus has already forgiven me for whatever it's I've done should make it easier for me to forgive myself. And finally, I have to forget too. Forgiving myself is, at least intellectually, pretty easy to do. Forgetting is harder. Forgetting, meaning moving it out of my consciousness, out of my heart, and out of my mind, is harder. And my last point is that we struggle today with things going on in this world that just are completely incomprehensible that people are doing. I'm going to be careful not to get political. But this whole DACA issue is something people are doing to others. And I have tremendous pain over this. My ability to forgive the people who do that kind of thing is at the height of forgiveness, isn't it? This is when Jesus is talking about 7 times 77, folks. When we're able to forgive people who are doing terrible, terrible things to other people. When we're able to forgive and forget things that people are doing terrible things to other people, then we have moved into the Jesus forgiveness side of the house. Then it's gone beyond just what's intellectually something I can do. Then I have actually listened to Jesus talking to me in this gospel message and telling me that if I'm going to actually forgive, I have to actually forgive. And that means forgive even those that are just so outside of the realm of what I believe is right and wrong and true. I have to forgive them too. And the last point, the truth is, when we're able to forgive those people, those who have done the most damage, those who have pained the most people, those who have hurt the most people, when we're able to forgive them, we have then crossed over into the realm of God's forgiveness for us. And that's a whole different way of looking at life. Amen.
Amen.